All right. We're missing lights. That's beautiful. So I've seen a lot of questions from you guys, mostly related on gear, because that's what we did in the last months and so around here, and I don't blame you for that. But I believe there is a kind of masking behind those questions. You actually are interested in creating beautiful imagery. So I came up with the idea of making a mini series to explain things about your cameras, to basically give you more control to your camera and create better and maybe become a better photographer, not a pro photographer. Hey, what's good everyone, Chris here, welcome back to the channel. And like I said, I decided to come up with a mini series of, let's say, videos to explain things to you that are essential for creating better imagery. And today we're talking about Aperture. Well, if you are not acquainted with the debate about Aperture and how important Aperture is, well, it is a huge discussion all over the internet, not these days, for a long time. And people are saying that wider apertures are better, some say that narrower apertures are better. But what is aperture? Aperture is the amount of light that a lens allows to pass on to the sensor. And because it's about the lens, the aperture is only controlled by the lens that you're using, and it can be controlled on the camera or it can be controlled on the lens, depending on the lens. Some have that beautiful aperture ring here that everyone loves, or almost everyone, and some don't, and they need to be controlled on the dials of your camera. Now, how aperture works? Well, there's some blades inside of the lens, and if you're looking at the lens in a pretty good source of light, you will see the blades that are opening and closing the moment you are turning the aperture on, even when you're doing it on the camera. And that means the lens is gonna close and open a portal to the light to pass and go to your sensor. That means the larger the aperture is, the more light it's gonna end up on the sensor. The narrower the aperture is, the less light it's gonna hit the sensor. So that's where the basically misunderstanding is. Narrower aperture means higher numbers, which is basically reverted. But that's how it works. An aperture of f8 is bigger or narrower than an aperture of f1.8. So to get more light in your cameras, to basically illuminate the sensor better, you have to have a wider aperture, 1.8, 1.2, 1.0, f2, and so on and so forth. Now, how that can help you? Well, those numbers are associated with other numbers, those for shutter speed and for ISO, and we're gonna talk about that in the next video. But for today, you only have to keep in mind that when you're using an narrower aperture, you're gonna get less light. When you're using a wider aperture, you're gonna get more light. But that's not it. That's not all of it. Aperture also controls a phenomena called depth of field. A very wide aperture will give you a very narrower depth of field. A narrower aperture is gonna give you a wider depth of field. So it's basically the other way around. If you are using an f1.8 aperture, your depth of field is gonna be very thin. If you are using an f8 aperture, your depth of field is gonna be a little bit more wider and gives you a little bit more things in focus, basically. And if you want me, I can get in depth with the focal plane and everything that involves this kind of stuff. But for now, understand this. Aperture controls light and also depth of field. So if you want to have a little bit more depth of field, or if you want your subject to stand out in your images and have a blurry foreground and background, you have to use a wider aperture or a smaller number from 1.8 to, let's say, f4. If you want more depth of field, if you want more things in focus, then you have to use a narrower aperture, let's say from a 5.6 to f16, and so on and so forth. This is pretty much it with the aperture. It's not complicated. The only thing that basically confuses everyone is the fact that the values are reverted. The wider the aperture, the less depth of field you're gonna have. The narrower the aperture, the more depth of field you're gonna have. The wider the aperture, the more light you're gonna get. The narrower the aperture, the less light you're gonna get onto your sensor. And that's pretty much it. Simple as that. That was the first part of this series. I hope it was helpful. I hope you guys will enjoy this series because I'm trying to teach you stuff, and this is not only the technical stuff. I'm gonna teach you how to use your aperture to create beautiful stuff, also your shutter speed, your ISO, your composition, your framing, and so on and so forth. So if you enjoy this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also look in the description below for more videos in our photography playlist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I realize that you guys enjoy the videos but forget to press that button. Go ahead and hit it, and stay focused, my friends. I will definitely see you in a bit.